Testing, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Where are my docs? Stats? No, that's not it. Okay. Chats. There we go. Oh, look, first comment already. Hello, Flower Child. What house system do I prefer to use? I believe it's called house system. That system where each sign is a house. That's what I am interested in. But in any case, hello to you, Flower Child. Hello to everybody who is about to appear. Hello to the internets. Hello to the world. Is this the same in Bhava Lagna chart? What is Bhava Lagna again? YouTube live control panel. Come up, come up, come up, come up, come up. But in any case, for the two people that are here, Genesis Ramirez. I'm assuming Genesis is not your first name. Good afternoon, good evening to you. Where I am, it's 9 p.m. basically. Hello. I don't even know how to pronounce that. Unicorn 8. Did you guys watch my last video? What did you guys think about it? I was so excited to post that video. I felt like it was really, really fun. But there is a second Ashwini video coming. So, watch out for that one. I'm not sure if it'll be quite as fun as the first one, but I'll try to make it so. Anyway. Alright, let me start by reading the first paragraphs of the document. This is Saturn in the 7th house. Saturn in the 7th. Oh, let me put that title. Why didn't I put that title? Saturn in the 7th. Alright then, so let us begin. Saturn is known as the timekeeper, but time is something that doesn't really exist. Ooh, let me write that. Saturn is known as the timekeeper, but time isn't something that really exists. Why am I confusing myself? What does exist is motion and movement. Think about it. How do we tell time on Earth? How do you know when it's 3 o'clock or 10 o'clock? It is through the motion of the sun. We know when it's this time or that time because of the motion of the sun. But if we lived on Jupiter or Mars, 1 hour would not take 60 minutes. Instead, 1 hour could take 100 minutes or 1,000 minutes. And then consider this. What if we existed outside the solar system? Then how would we tell time? I will tell you how. We would study our environment to look for the fixed, regular movements that are unchanging, and then observe how all other non-fixed objects change as a response to those fixed, regular movements. The sun is an example of a fixed, regular movement. And based on the sun, we study how all other non-fixed objects change as a response to the sun. Animals change their behavior in accordance to the sun. Plants change their behavior in response to the sun, and so do people. Saturn is called the timekeeper, but in truth, it is the motion keeper, the rhythm keeper, because it studies how all things change in relation to that which is unchangeable. So I'm not sure if I made myself understood. Let us go to the internet. Let us look up, I don't know, pictures of the solar system or what have you. All right, so time, right? We often have we often have this conversation about whether time exists or not. In a way, time does not actually exist, right? Because we're the ones who decide that 1 hour is 60 minutes. We're the ones who decide that, oh, after 100 years, not exactly 100 years, like 80 or something years, that's when people die. But what are minutes? What are hours? What are years? What we call time is really how human beings measure um, the motion of the sun, right? Our concept of time is really based on um, anchoring ourselves to the sun. It also reminds me of, what are those things called? Sundials? I think they're called sundials, aren't they? They're called sundials. But in any case, yes, we call Saturn the planet of time, but really it is the planet of motion. Because time is measured differently depending on where you are, depending on the different planets that you're in, or if you're literally outside of the solar system. So you no longer use the sun as an anchor. Now you have to look for something else that is unchangeable. Now, how does this relate to what we're going to talk about with Saturn in the seventh house? Let us continue. If one's motion is always fixed and never compromising, then necessarily all other objects must compromise themselves. If one's motion is fixed and never compromising, then necessarily all other objects must move around that fixed object. In the context of our solar system, it is the sun that is the unchanging thing, right? And it's the sun that we all anchor ourselves to, and it's the sun that is our main object of measuring time, right? Because the sun does not move and we move around it, and we study our movement around it. So now let us relate this to the context of marriage. All right then. If one has Saturn in the seventh house, it is either one is oneself, the fixed object, and one's partner revolves around them, or the opposite, one's partner is the fixed object, and one must oneself revolve around one's partner. One's partner is either the one constantly predicting one's behavior, constantly studying one's mood, and constantly thinking of the best way to serve one or assist one, or one oneself behaves this way towards one's partner. I am having a good evening, especially being up here with you guys. Saturn the 7th with a Shweeny moon. Okay. Alright then, let's move on. So now consider this next point. There are those that say that classical astrological texts were written more for men than they were for women. The path for the average woman was more limited in the olden days, with many being confined to the home. And so even if the chart of a woman of those times shows indications for being a doctor, she would still be a stay-at-home wife. She would still be a stay-at-home wife, but with more of an inclination towards medicine. If a woman's chart showed inclination for architecture, she would still be a stay-at-home wife, but perhaps with more of an inclination towards arrangements of furniture within the home. Even astrology is bound by context, and so charts are sometimes interpreted differently for women than they are for men for this reason. Saturn in the seventh generally suggests that the spouse will be submissive to the native, but in a world where women themselves were powerless and a man's ability to provide resources was linked to his bravery, his audacity, his shrewdness, and even his pride, for a woman to have a spouse that is more lowly, humble, quiet, and servile may not have been very favorable. So, in the past, specifically in the chart of a woman, this may not have been a very good position. But in a more modern context, where many women are working and many men feel very threatened by female power and authority, having a man who has a small ego, as Saturn is the planet of humility, a man whose masculinity is not easily threatened, who is willing to be supportive and help his wife, to help his wife become her most powerful self, this position in the modern context in the chart of a woman could actually be highly beneficial and powerful. So let me elaborate a little bit more on this. Right. a lot of astrologers say that the way that we interpret astrological positions, exaltations, debilitations, they apply much more to men than they do to women. Because in the past, it is men that had the opportunities of gaining authority and gaining power in the world, whereas women were always confined to the home, you know. And so, Sun in the first house was seen as a very good position back then, but specifically because they were studying men. Saturn in the first house was seen as a bad position back then because for the chart of a man, Saturn making one lowly, Saturn making one quiet, it was not seen as a very good thing. But funny enough, in the modern times, what you find is that many women who are very successful in the world, more often than having Sun in the first house, they actually have Saturn in the first house. You more often find successful women with Saturn in the first house than Sun, which is confusing based on like traditional significations, right? Because the planets behave differently based on your birth gender. So what I'm trying to say is that even though generally speaking, people see Saturn in the seventh as a good position, in the chart of a woman in the past, that would not have been a good position because that would suggest, in general, that would suggest that your man was not very powerful. It would suggest that your man was not very respected. You know, all of the most negative significations of Saturn, basically. But in any case, I'm curious about any questions that you guys might have about this position. 17 concurrent viewers, 27 views overall. But I'm curious about questions that you guys may have. I'm also still trying to discover what these buttons do. Okay. Interesting. And what does this do? Okay. And these are emojis. All right, awesome. Cyber Mermaid. That's why I can tell you're a good astrologer. You analyze context and the reasons why instead of just repeating text. Oh, well, thank you. No questions about displacement. All right, cool. I shall await your questions in any case. Let us move on. Where are we now? So continuing on, whereas in the past, a woman with Saturn in the seventh would probably have a husband who was not very able to lift her up. In the present, a woman could be a CEO, a doctor, an engineer, and her husband would help her manage her entire life and reduce her workload. All right, then, I didn't elaborate on that part. So, whereas in the past, for a woman to have Saturn in the seventh, that probably would not have been a good position because in the past, a woman's resources was her husband's. A woman's ability to gain power was completely tied to her husband, right? It's one of the reasons why Jupiter was generally seen as the significator for the husband in the past, and even in the present still. Because Jupiter gives a person everything, basically, right? But in our modern times where women have the ability to work and women want to be ambitious, one of the problems in relationships that we're facing nowadays is that a lot of men do not know how to contextualize their own masculinity. Because a lot of men, the idea of masculinity for them is like completely tied to the amount of money that they make, etc., etc. And so it's hard for them to really, it's hard for them to really make sense of this whole thing. But if a woman has Saturn in the seventh, that man would not be threatened by her. He would not be threatened by her success. He would not be threatened by her power. And he would instead try his best to support her and to manage her, etc., etc. Right? Because Saturn always thinks in terms of service and surveying. Now, moving on. Now, in general, for both men and women, a Saturn in the seventh suggests a partner who makes themselves small. And in so doing, they fit your lifestyle more easily because they put to the back their own individual ambitions and plans and instead act as a support to your ideas, your ambitions, and your plans. They're always thinking of how best to manage you and support you. If you have to wake up very very early for work, they will support you. They will wake up earlier to make your lunch and breakfast. Depending on whatever lifestyle you have, your partner, if you have Saturn in the seventh house, it does not matter how crazy your schedule is. It does not matter how crazy your life is. Your partner will always try their best and do their best to fit themselves within that structure, and even to help you structure that life better. You know what I mean? Because they would always try to make themselves malleable to fit your life and to help your life work much better. That is what a Saturn in the seventh house would help you with. Once again, it's one of the reasons why it's one of the most awesome placements. You can, of course, clearly see how Sun in the seventh house here would really be, in some ways, not very good, because the Sun is a planet of independence. The Sun is a planet of independence. So somebody who has Sun in the seventh house, and consider this, traditionally speaking, the Sun is also a planet of travel. You want to know why? Because the Sun is a planet of non-attachment. What is the number one thing that keeps people from not traveling? The fact that they're attached to their mom, to their dad, to their friends. Even if their friends all move away from their hometown, people still suffer from an attachment to their own hometown. Most people want to be attached to things. They want to be attached to their house. They want to be attached to their pets. They want to be attached to familiar environments. But the Sun is a planet of non-attachment. And so it wanders and wanders and wanders. You know what I mean? Many people suffer from such an attachment to their own friends and family that a part of them does not want to make new friends. But the Sun easily makes new friends and easily lets go of those friendships as well. The Sun is also not a planet that is very good at remembering things. And it is also a planet that does not miss people very much. What you will find is that, and keep in mind, the things that I'm saying, of course, also apply to Sun nakshatras, because Sun nakshatras really represent the raw elements, the raw significations of the Sun. And so because of that, if somebody has Sun in the seventh house, instead of your partner trying to conform to your life, your partner would have their own life and you would have your own life. You guys would be like roommates, basically. You might see each other when you see each other. You see each other in the weekends and things like that. You know what I mean? It's very interesting also that there are some astrologers that say that the Sun destroys the significations of whatever house it sits in. Because, think about it. If you're married to this person, but this person is literally living their own life, which that's what Sun in the seventh could do, you guys basically aren't married. And so the great thing about Saturn in the seventh is that what it suggests is that your partner bends and conforms to your reality and they fit your reality. Or you could do the same for them as well. That depends on other things in the charts. You know what I mean? That depends on other things in the charts. But yes, you guys fit into each other's lives. So that's what's awesome about it. Yes, Paula, having Saturn in the seventh absolutely means restricted number of partners. Something that can be very, very tough, very, very painful for many people. But the great thing about Saturn in the seventh is that after your first Saturn return, it unlocks itself and it releases itself. So Saturn is a planet that burdens you, right? It is a planet of burden and it burdens you. But the way that Saturn operates is, at different ages, it places different burdens on you. Anytime Saturn is in a house, the first thing that it does, generally speaking, is completely deny you all of the significations of that house. And what it does is that it forces you to really learn discipline and really learn how to deal with the matters of that house without actually directly experiencing those significations. So one day I'm going to do my Saturn return video, but let me just give you a quick thing. Let's say you have Saturn in the seventh house, right? If you have Saturn in the seventh house, again, it suggests that you have a very difficult time being in a relationship, finding a relationship for whatever reason. But Saturn there also teaches you also forces you to learn what it is, forces you to learn what relationships are, forces you to study the nature of relationships. You know what I mean? Because Saturn is also a planet that, again, it's a planet that learns from experience, and it's also a planet of science, because science is also about learning from experience. And so, someone who has Saturn in the seventh house, you might be very interested in studying other people's relationships to understand the nature of relationships. So, Saturn in the seventh would completely deny you those significations and would force you to learn about those significations. And then after your first Saturn return, or a few years before that, or sometimes a few years even after that, Saturn would finally unlock the seventh house and would allow you to actually experience the signification of the seventh house. And because you were doing such a good job before your Saturn return of really learning the best aspects of how to deal with the seventh house, once Saturn does unlock the seventh house and allow you to experience it, you're not going to destroy yourself like other people destroyed themselves. You're not going to get into bad relationships with people who don't respect you, because you will have studied the nature of such things, and you would have identified, yes, you would have studied the nature of such things, and you would have known not to get involved with such things. You know what I mean? And so Saturn limits you and it denies you, but at its best, it does so like a protective parent. You know what I mean? It shelters you like a parent. You know what I mean? Not letting you go out into the world, but trying to instruct you every day about how the outside world is like. And then one day, your parent opens the door and allows you to go out, or sometimes you jump out the window or something like that. So yeah, moving on. No, it would not work similarly to Saturn being to the seventh house being ruled by Saturn. The energy of a planet in a house is a very different thing than simply having Capricorn or Aquarius. It is a very different thing. You cannot interpret it the same way. Yes, Sun nakshatras are very much like that. They are very much like that. But it's also one of the but the problem with Sun nakshatras is that if you have this type of relationship that you're talking about, Cyber Mermaid, a lot of times they don't work. It's one of the reasons why Sun nakshatras tend to actually do very well with Saturn nakshatras, because Saturn nakshatras tend to mold themselves to somebody else's life. Uh, Generally speaking, the most common thing that you'll hear running with the horses is that Saturn in the seventh suggests, yes, a difference in age. To be completely honest, on a personal level, I haven't really seen that too much. I'm not saying that it's not something that exists. I mean, why wouldn't it be? I'm sure it does. But I personally haven't seen it all that much. I haven't seen it all that much. I have not seen it all that much. But what you're saying about being in a relationship with people of a different ethnicity, having Saturn in the seventh, I think that's interesting. I wonder how true that might be. Obviously, we know that if you have nodes in the seventh house, Rahu or Ketu, it could suggest being in a relationship with somebody of a different ethnicity. But what about Saturn? What about Saturn? What about Saturn? Saturn in the seventh, could that have a relationship with being in a relationship with somebody with a different ethnicity? I need to think about that. Yes, Saturn in the fifth and Saturn in the seventh. One similarity that they do have is that they do restrict romantic relationships. They absolutely do. Retrogrades, I'm trying to study retrogrades. I'm still learning about them, Allison. What I can say is that a lot of astrologers often say that retrogrades make a planet even stronger, but that can be interpreted in many different ways. Hi, Blessed. Most of your partners have been younger than you. That's interesting. All right, let's continue. Where were we? All right, then. So, for this individual with Saturn the seventh, your partner literally becomes the invisible backbone of your success. But recall also that Saturn represents all things that we neglect and push away. And so, despite the fact that one's partner is literally responsible for so much of your power, you could literally ignore them or not recognize them for how they help you, and then you could take them for granted. You may not even find them very interesting after a while. So, that's something to watch out for. Now, let's consider this. This might be a little exciting for some of you. One or one's partner modifies themselves to best suit their partner in other ways, like sexually. As Saturn in the seventh suggests someone who is good at going with the rhythm of one's partner. And so this could also help solve issues of sexual incompatibility because one's partner is willing to learn, conform, and submit themselves to one's tastes and preferences. So, in the risk of sounding crass, one's partner becomes a servant of love, let's say, willing to dutifully learn how to satisfy one's partner. It is said that Saturn's ability to serve and to serve well is so intense that it literally calls planet Venus. And so Saturn in the seventh can actually create a very erotic and private love life. To serve well, after all, is the same as to please, and so Saturn becomes the servant who understands how to please the partner exceptionally well. Recall that Saturn is actually the planet of ignorance, and so it relates to an early stage of not knowing how to operate the significations of that house. But it is also the planet that learns through time and experience. In the beginning, this suggests a lot of awkwardness regarding sex and romance, but if Saturn is well placed, it suggests that eventually this relationship will blossom into a very sexually exciting union, where the partners patiently learn how to properly serve and therefore please one another in a way that cannot be imitated, which of course preserves the union. All right then, so let's talk a little about that. So Saturn on its own is not really a sexual planet. It's not really a sexy planet, let's say. And Saturn in the seventh could actually limit sexual ability, sexual understanding, etc. But if it is well placed, because Saturn is all about learning how to serve somebody, learning all about how to please that person, studying that person to learn all how to serve and please that person. In the end, Saturn could learn so much about how to please that person that it can become a uniquely satisfying sexual relationship, right? Yeah. So there's that. And so that's the reason why, it's one of the reasons why Saturn the seventh can really protect a relationship. Saturn in the seventh also aspects the first, and Saturn in general is an intimidating planet. It is considered the most intimidating planet. And one of the reasons why it's considered the most intimidating planet is because of how much it searches for imperfections. Saturn searches for a lot of imperfections within oneself, and because it obsesses with imperfections in oneself, it makes one perfect, and it also looks for imperfections in other people. And people tend to feel threatened by people who present themselves as a little too perfect, because they start to compare themselves to them. They start to tell themselves, "Oh, well, that person's too good for me," things like that. Yeah. And for other reasons as well, Saturn can be very intimidating. And so it's a very common thing for a woman to have very strong Saturn placements, and for men to find them intimidating. It's perfectly natural. It happens all the time. Your question is not stupid, don't worry, Hello Kitty Cat. Is a retro Saturn in the seventh also to be considered as Saturn in the sixth house? I'm confused by this question. Saturn in the seventh and Saturn in the sixth, two very different placements. Oh, very sorry to hear that. All right, let us go back. So, one of the ways that Saturn can protect the marriage is Saturn does not communicate sexuality to the outside world. Saturnian individuals can seem either sexless or sexually intimidating. They can carry an aura that does not invite a lot of flirtation or sexual banter. Now consider the opposite. Consider the sort of person who possesses a great deal of sexual energy. The sort of person that, without trying to, they provoke people into chasing them. This sort of personality type, this sort of aura calls too many suitors that can either provoke jealousy in one's partner or in general may offer opportunities for infidelity. This is why astrologers often say that having too much energy in the seventh house can destroy a marriage, or having Mars in seventh can also destroy a marriage because the partner is too provocative without even trying. But the cold neutrality of Saturn here suggests a partner that does not communicate sexual energy to others, but instead only opens themselves up sexually to you, the native. So let me elaborate a little bit more further on this. Saturn comes across as very cold. Saturn does not come across as a very sexually open person. It does not carry that loose sexual energy. I think you understand the sort of energy that I'm talking about. There's some people that just carry that aura, that sexy aura that invites you to dare to flirt with them, invites you to dare to ask them out, invites you to dare to play with them sexually, you know what I mean? I don't know, like think of a Marilyn Monroe, for example. She carries a lot of that sexual aura, the sort of aura that it's almost like she's inviting you to ask her out. She's inviting you to be playful with her. She's inviting you to, mess around with her. But Saturn energy is the opposite of that Marilyn Monroe energy, is much more cold. But here's the thing. That's not always a bad thing. Because if you're somebody who communicates too much sexual energy like a Marilyn Monroe, guess what? It's very difficult for you to be in a stable relationship because either your partner is always going to be very jealous because your energy is always going to invite people all the time towards you. It's always going to invite other men to try something on you, you know what I mean? Which is going to make your partner feel insecure. So that's something that can threaten a relationship. And that kind of personality type can also create opportunities for infidelity, And so having the sort of personality that is more cold, is not very sexually open, is not very sexually loose, a little bit more restricted, it can actually be very protective for a marriage because it communicates to people, yo, don't come after me, don't flirt with me, I'm not available for that kind of stuff, And furthermore, in regards to divorces and things like that, on my Patreon, I did a study on divorce rates and things like that using astrology, studying various individuals, various celebrities, specifically people that anybody can confirm, to try to understand where is that article, where is us here. See divorce in birth charts. And so what I did was I studied the birth charts of various celebrities that are known for marrying and divorcing multiple times to see what it is that they had in common. And a very prominent seventh house was one of those things. A very prominent seventh house was one of those things. I've never heard of this. And unfortunately, why? What did I say, unicorn? What did I say? I don't remember. The house system that I believe is the most accurate is the whole house system. That's what I think. All right. The partner of the Saturn in the seventh native would always solve one's problems before they fully mature into actual problems. One's partner would be so good at diffusing situations and managing situations before they become difficult issues. But this is one of the reasons why one may neglect one's partner as well, because the sort of person that is always solving problems before they become problems is usually never thanked and never acknowledged, as the evidence that they are solving problems is usually invisible or absent, as the actual problem itself is, of course, solved before it can be witnessed. At its worst, if Saturn is badly placed, or if other conditions apply, the partner could literally be a slave of the native, or the native could be a slave of the partner, overburdened with various chores and various tasks, and also at its worst, since Saturn is by its nature not a sexual planet, the relationship could be sexless, and each person could simply be seen as being of only utilitarian value. The Saturn in the seventh native spouse may therefore be disregarded and neglected. That's interesting. I don't think I've ever heard of that personally. All right, then where were we? Naturally, Saturn in the seventh suggests a quiet partner that does not seek opportunities to speak, but when they do speak, they tend to make a large impact in their environments and people obey them. Naturally, to have Saturn in the seventh suggests that you have or have had quite a bit of difficulty finding a partner or attracting a partner. Saturn is a planet also of repulsion, and being a planet of limitations, it minimizes the seventh. However, after the Saturn return, Saturn releases its grip and allows the native to fully experience the seventh house. But before the Saturn return, this again suggests someone who has had very limited sexual and romantic experiences. One of the names used to describe the seventh house is Smara, which is actually one of the names of Vedic Cupid Kamadeva, suggesting that the seventh house is a very important house of seduction and attraction. And so having Saturn in the seventh suggests one who struggles to understand the opposite sex, as Saturn is a planet of ignorance, but also one who struggles to flirt and seduce the opposite sex as well. But just as one struggles to seduce others, one is also oneself hard to seduce. Whereas the average person may find other relatively average people attractive, the Saturn in the seventh person is immune to ordinary forms of seduction. One would have to be highly attractive or highly handsome to really have an effect on the native. So this brings us to another reason such a one can take years to get into a relationship. They are literally hard to excite. But actually, let me add something else here that I forgot to add. You know the thing about flirting and seduction? Most flirting and seduction is indirect. Let me write that. Another point is that most flirting and seduction is indirect. People winking at you, people smiling in a coquettish way, people laughing at a joke in a weird way, people looking for little opportunities to touch you or to introduce themselves, physically into your space, just very, very little things. Because, the truth about announcing to somebody that you're interested in them, it can be a little scary. It can be a little intimidating. The truth about the social world is that most people, most of the times, don't just come at you and saying, "Hey, little mama, can I take you out?" That's not really the way that most people go about seduction. Most seduction is very, very indirect. It's very, very subtle, because you want to give space to that person to see what you're trying to do. You want to give. If that person is interested in you and you perform like little things, presumably they'll come after you. And if they don't come after you, it's because they're not interested. But here's the thing about some people. Some people are so socially not very advanced socially or not very astute socially that they literally can't tell when other people are flirting with them. Because here's the thing, many people flirt with us all the time. But many of us, particularly men, are actually not very aware when other people are flirting with us. You know what I mean? And so we lose a lot of opportunities to be in relationships or even to just have a little bit of fun because we quite literally don't even notice that. And so somebody who has Saturn in the fifths and Saturn in the sevenths, or Saturn aspecting those houses, they quite literally do not notice when other people are trying to call their attention, and for that reason they miss many opportunities for a relationship. So let me write all those thoughts down. Another point is that most flirting and seduction is indirect. Okay, winking, slight head nods, coquettish laughs, subtle touches, and little ways of introducing oneself physically into another person's personal space. Let me do this. Let me do that. To be those who are more socially perceptive notice when other people are trying to call their attention in subtle ways. And for this reason, they profit from these opportunities for, how do I articulate this? They profit from these opportunities to pursue and develop relationships, whether short term or long term. But Saturn in the fifth or seventh, or aspecting these houses, can, oh, I'm running out of battery life. Damn. I have to go get my charger. It is in the living room. Let me run right now. I'll be back in 15 seconds. All right. Okay, so where were we? But Saturn in the fifth or seventh, or aspecting these houses, can be so socially slow, let's say, that they literally do not notice the subtle ways that others communicate interests, and so they literally miss opportunity for fun and play, if you know what I mean. What I mean. Wink, wink. I'm being very cheesy, but in any case, why not? Let me make this italic. Why is this bracket? Well, in that case, let's make this bracket italic as well. Okay, let's see the comments. Where are we? Where are we? Where are we? Glad you could catch this live. That's very interesting, Nicole, about what you're saying about KROS. I'm gonna have to watch that KROS video actually to understand what he means. That's the only thing that I can do. Can confirm, but you're being very vague. That's beautiful. I love to hear about long marriages. Just more aggression? What do you mean more aggression? As in people aggressively asserting themselves on you? Damn. Sorry to hear that. Yes, running with the horses. If there's one thing the Saturnians suffer from, people with Saturn in the first, people Saturn aspecting the first, people with Saturn in the seventh, is they have very high standards. And yes, they do suffer from disgust and repulsion. I don't know if you watched my video on Alakshmi, but yeah, Saturn energy is very much in there. Okay. So now, where are we? We are at the end of our document, which means we're at the end of our live. But I'm curious to hear if you guys have any questions or comments. So let me just read these last two paragraphs, then I'll go to the chat. So another one of the reasons why Saturn in the seventh can bless and protect the union is because since the seventh house is also related to seduction and attraction, since Saturn sits there, it can mean that a person is free from attacks of passion, free from attacks of lust, and they are not susceptible to love spells very easily. Because Saturn's cold and indifferent energies block these opportunities for random dalliances. For the native who possesses this placement, at its best, you make very practical decisions regarding love and relationships. And as Saturn is a planet also of prediction, you are very good at really looking at potential partners to see if you are compatible, to predict how you two will be together, and to decide whether or not you are a match. There we have it. Saturn in the seventh. You're telling me to watch KRS's Saturn in the 7 and Saturn in the first D9 video. Alright, I'll do that. I will definitely do that. I see. I understand that, Stan. I definitely understand that. Now, what does this button do? Oh, I see. Top fans. Very interesting. Would Jupiter in the 7 imply high standards or someone who is generally more open? No. Jupiter in the 7, generally speaking, does not suggest very high standards when it comes to partners. It suggests somebody who has too many suitors. Too many suitors. And it suggests somebody who, even if they were to get married, their marriage is always going to be threatened by too many partners. Always threatened by too many partners. You know. See, here's, the weird thing about the seventh house is that the seventh house is a weird house, actually. The seventh house is a weird house. The seventh house actually does not like to have a lot of energy. I mean, if you're the type of person that likes to mess around and play around, you know what I mean? Wink, wink. A lot. Then having planets like Jupiter in the seventh might be great. But if you're somebody who just wants a nice, simple, stable relationship, having too much energy in the seventh is usually, it's not a good thing. Even though I don't have Saturn in my 7 and just have DSC in Capricorn. Oh, Descendant. Oh, okay. I have to admit, this resonated with me a lot, but maybe I'm conflicting it with Rahu in the 7th. Oh, you have Rahu in the 7th. Okay. Rahu in the 7th. Let me think a little bit about everything that I said and how that relates to Rahu in the 7th. Okay. You know something, Priscilla? I think of every nakshatra that I've seen, every nakshatra pair, like, whenever two people have the same nakshatras, Rohini relationships are the ones that I tend to work the most. Two Swatis in a relationship, two Vishakhas in a relationship, two Jayeshtas in relationships. I don't see those really working out because usually two people that have the same nakshatra that doesn't really work out. But two Rohinis, I can honestly say I've seen many successful relationships with two Rohinis. That much I can say. Allison, yes. That is something that does happen to Saturn in the seventh house people. A lot of Saturn in the seventh house people can also close themselves off because they don't actually believe that other people want to be in a relationship with them, and so they spare themselves the heartache. That much is definitely true as well. Okay, that's curious. So that does this. Okay, and then what does this button do? Okay. Still trying to figure this out. What do you mean if Saturn works well in these? I'm not sure if I understand that point that you're making. Saturn plus Jupiter in the 7th here. Two wives, but in complete submission to the point they've cast their egos aside and accept. You have two wives? Alright, okay. Interesting. Interesting. So you have two wives. So on the one hand, Jupiter has given you more than one wife, and on the other hand, Saturn has made them submissive to you. That's a very curious thing. That's very, very curious. But what sign is that happening in? I'm very curious to know what sign that is happening in. What is that name? Gotta be rich live. Gotta be rich live. You're talking about Nish Bung Raj Yoga. Uh, are they conjunct? Kinda, yes. But here's the thing: there's Nish Bung Raj Yoga, and then there's Ucha Bung Yoga. The one is the reversal of debility, but the other is the reversal of exaltation. So when you have Sun conjunct Saturn in Aries, it could mean that Saturn is saved from debility, but the Sun loses its exaltation. I'm also curious as to how they gotta be rich, how they got to be rich live met his wives. No, that's not what I said, Stanislav. That's not what I said. What I was trying to say is that Sun nakshatras tend to do well with Saturn nakshatras, like people, like in relationships. One Sun nakshatra person being in relationship with a Saturn nakshatra person, because the Sun nakshatra has a difficult time really going with the motion of somebody else's life, but Saturn can really modify itself for somebody else's life. So yeah, that is definitely true. That is definitely true. You are welcome. You are welcome. Did you guys see that I modified the thumbnail for my video? Oh, here it's not showing the modification. It's not showing the modification here. I changed this Ashwini thumbnail to something else. I changed it to this, see? I don't know, I was feeling nostalgic for childhood. And so I decided to upload this picture. Yeah. I'm coming up with like random things to talk about because, to be honest, I kind of do enjoy being here with you guys, and I kind of don't want to leave too soon. But I feel like we're also running out of topics. But also, I'm not sure if you guys saw, but I'm not offering mini readings. Let me go back to YouTube. YouTube. So like, before I offered like full readings, right? Like 9 pages, 10 pages, 12 pages, things like that. And it was like a lot of like nuanced information. But the thing is that I used to get a lot of people asking me to like reduce prices because they would really like to afford what I offer. And so I decided, okay, let me introduce like mini astrology readings, right? And instead of charging $200 like I used to, for the mini readings, I charge just $30. And so it's like it's more affordable, you know. And so if you guys are interested, yeah, hit me up. And also the mini readings, I deliver them at a much quicker rate. Like my $200 readings used to take like 2 months. My mini readings, I do them in like a week or sometimes less. So there's that. Oh, that's very interesting, what you're saying. Very, very interesting. It was a fun show, Powerpuff Girls. What's next for me? It is a second Ashwini video. I'm going to do a second Ashwini video. And then after that Ashwini video, I'm telling you guys all my videos that I'm planning. So after my second Ashwini video, I'm going to do a Maga video. I'm not sure if I'm going to do 1 video or 2 videos. And then after those videos, I'm going to do a big Moolah video. And then I think those are all the videos that I'm probably going to make this year. Nakshatra base. Like the long Nakshatra base videos. So that's 1, 2, 3, possibly 4. Because as you can imagine, like each video takes me a little while to like finish. Like 2 months or something like that. So like, yeah. Yes, I definitely plan on doing more live. Speaking of goddesses, one of these days, I'm going to do a live about this goddess right here, Mother Bhuvaneshwari. And I'm also going to talk about how she really, really helps when it comes to like relationships. I'm going to do that video. So don't worry, a video like that is coming. Ashwinis are bigger looksmaxers than Chitra. Ketu nakshatras in general are bigger looksmaxers. For men especially, Ketu nakshatras are very, very vain. Very vain. Very into their physical appearance. More into their physical appearance than Chitra. But I'm going to do a video on that. Since this year is going to be dedicated to Ketu nakshatras, I'm going to do a video on that. You guys are going to watch that video. So yeah. Yes. K2 and Saturn, for both men and women, but especially for men, K2 and Saturn is very much related to vanity and grooming. Because those two planets are malefics and they're interested in imperfections and they're always looking for imperfections. Yeah, Anuradha is not going to be anytime too soon, unfortunately. Jupiter in Revati. Jupiter in Revati is something that I'm going to make a Patreon post about when I eventually make my Revati video. Oh, I'm really happy it helped you understand your friend better. What are my thoughts on Clear Nocti's Mula vampire video? I was very impressed by that video. Very, very impressed. I thought it was a wonderful video, very exciting. I remember also in that video that she said that like different nakshatra types are involved in different types of vampire movies and things like that. When it came to like Kritika, my Kritika video was more so exploring how Kritikas suffer from a lot of guilt. And how Kritika is also a lot about really learning how to master yourself and not giving yourself over to your vices and learning how to value logic and being logical over being emotional and giving into your lower base emotions. But I thought it was interesting that she related Mula also to those qualities and to those elements. I thought it was very interesting. Yeah. I mean, those are my thoughts on it, I guess. In Taurus, this is a very good placement. I think the manga video will also be fun, but sometimes I don't know because, see, sometimes my videos are a little bit negative, and I do not always represent nakshatras in the most favorable lights, you know what I mean? And some people get offended by that. Most people don't get offended by that, actually. Most people don't mind the cynical way that I go about explaining the nakshatras. But there was one video that I made that people really had an issue with because they really did not like the negative light that I casted that nakshatra in. But most other of my videos, people don't mind. Having energies in the first is not similar, but it does influence energies in the seventh. Saturn in the seventh, if it is badly placed. So see, here's the thing. Saturn is a planet of repulsion. Ugliness can be repulsive, but here's the thing, you guys. Beauty can also be repulsive. Beauty is not always attractive. Sometimes beauty is repulsive. Haven't you ever seen a person that is so physically perfect that a part of you actually avoids them? You may avoid them because you're jealous of them. You may avoid them because you look at them and they seem so perfect that you feel like they will reject you or they will judge you. You may reject them. They just repulse you. Like, imagine, for example, going to school with somebody who looks like a supermodel, somebody who looks like Bella Hadid. Wouldn't a part of you feel like, I don't know, I don't want to be friends with that person. I don't want to ask that person out because I feel like they would reject me. I feel like they would think that they're too good to be around me. You know what I mean? There is a beauty type. There is such a thing as a beauty type that is actually repulsive. That instead of inspiring you to approach them, there's a part of you that feels intimidated by them, and there's a part of you that just does not approach them very much. And so the thing about Saturn is that Saturn can find some way of repulsing and intimidating you. Sometimes he can do it because you are so ugly that they will really repulse you. But sometimes what it means is that you embody a beauty type that is so pristine, so put together that in itself is intimidating, and that in itself makes people avoid you. I think in my Mula video, I will talk about beauty as a form of repulsion and not attraction, actually. No, I do not see Venus nakshatras as connected to looks maxers. Venus nakshatras are connected to people who are interested in learning how to seduce people without depending on their looks. Because one of the symbols of Purvashada is the handheld fan that conceals the face. And so those people are interested in looking for ways to attract without depending on their looks. And Purvashada also understands that true attraction is not something that is based on appearance. Whereas looks maxers are so deluded that they think that appearance is the only thing that matters, and they don't realize that there's so much about a human being that makes them charming, so much about a human being that makes them attractive, that don't really depend much about the way that you look. You've heard that displacement can mean that people, I see, people will question why it is that you guys are together. That's interesting. I will think about that. That's interesting. All right, guys. I think now it's time to go. Thank you guys for keeping me company. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys for participating. So I guess now this is goodbye. So